All right, everyone. Dee Dee and I have been recording this podcast and sharing it with you with this free tool called Anchor. And it's 100% free for you to do. You can create your own podcast with special tools on their website right from your computer or your phone. It's pretty cool, right, Dee Dee?
You know, what I really love about Anchor is how easy it makes it to distribute your podcast to all the different players that are out there. So Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all the different players. You can just send it on out there.
Yeah, not only does it push it out to all the platforms, but no matter the size of your audience, Anchor is a great place for you to host and produce your podcast. Everything you need is in one place to make it. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. You're listening to
The Classroom Collaborative
podcast with your hosts, Dee Dee Wills,
Ed Rock,
and Adam Peterson.
Here we go.
We're so glad you're here.
Let's get started.
Go.
All right. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. So excited to be chatting again with Dee Dee Wills. I am Adam Peterson. Dee Dee, how are you?
I am so good. How are you?
I'm good. It's colder here now. What is it, October? It's almost Halloween.
I know.
Which is crazy. But
daylight savings, all that good stuff.
I saw something recently have you seen that post go around that says like the last time we changed clocks was in March when there was a full moon? When COVID started, when everything started. So people are like, I wonder if this weekend, if we change our clocks again, there's another full moon. Maybe that just shuts it all off.
That would be good. That would be great.
And then some other people say like, I'm not turning my clock back because I don't want an extra hour in 2020 for any reason at all.
Yeah, right. Let's get this year done. That would be amazing.
Oh my gosh, it's crazy. How is it snowing there now that it's cold?
We had a big snow a couple days ago or last week.
Yeah.
I fell, hit the ice.
Dang it. Just leave it at that.
I know. Dang it. Now my right hand isn't working right. So.
Oh, I'm not ready for winter. I always say I like snow on Christmas, but we had snow this week. It didn't stick. Yeah. We just had some flurries one day and I'm like, no, it's October. This shouldn't be happening. But
yeah, we still have some snow on the ground. So. We'll see. It's supposed to warm up. It'll be mid-60s the next week, so that'll be good.
Yeah. All right. So listeners, we wanted to talk about. I kind of brought up this topic to Dee Dee because she's more of the expert in this than I will ever be. But we wanted to talk about reading today, and it kind of stemmed from some stuff I've been reading online. Really, just people asking for help. I know I see it a lot in your primary collaborative group. People are always asking questions about reading groups and how they're making them work during pandemic or virtual learning. But right. I was hit with a question the other day about, this is, without going into details, students who are now showing up as kind of behind the eight ball, if that's the right term, or kind of below where they should be. They're not where they're supposed to be in a reading scope, right? Right. And the question that was presented to me was, they think so this child in question has always struggled with reading, but struggles even more so now after being in a complete virtual setting to start the year. Right. And now this child is back in school full day, and there's not a lot of desire to read, and the family's looking for ideas. So it was one of those things that I know I just presented you with this question this morning, Dee Dee, because I feel like it's all kind of coming together right now. Like I'm seeing question after question about this.
Like a perfect storm of everything that could go wrong is going wrong.
It seems like teachers are just really grasping for straws here about how to help kids who are struggling with reading, either because they're still virtual or were virtual or they're not able to engage the way they want to. So I thought you, with all your knowledge of this recently, I say recently, you've always been knowledgeable, but I know you took some courses and you've studied this a lot and kind of get your idea of what we should be doing.
Well, I think to go back, our conversation was that this student you're talking about is second, third grade, right? That's when it's really kind of all coming to a head, I guess, so to speak, right? And so that really does fall in line with what I had been learning in the past and I'm continuing to learn. So just kind of back up, right? If you and I had this conversation 12 months ago and you had said, what's going on, I would have said, well, guided reading would really help this student. And just to kind of give a clarification, guided reading, for those of you, many of you already know what this is students are placed into leveled text groups. So books are leveled based on text complexity. And then each level, it gets harder and harder. It's something that I think Fontes and Pinnell are kind of the gurus of that. I studied, I learned, I did so many workshops on guided reading. And so you start off with books that are like a level AA, and then you go to A, B, C, D, E. Also is related to the DRA. So that's one mode of education is level text, which each level grows in text complexity, and you select that book based on where that student can read independently, and then you try to find an instructional level, and that's where the instruction takes place. Okay, so that's what I would have said 12 months ago. Since then, I have started to study more and more on students who are not progressing, who are still having challenges. So one of the things that I have learned, I knew it, but I didn't know I knew it, right, was that 25% of students out there have some kind of language-based learning differences. So if we were in a room, with 20 students, you would have probably 4 to 5 students who are not acquiring the skills that the other students at the same pace, right? So as soon as that was said, I was like, well, yeah, that's my intervention group, right? So everybody has an intervention group. Everybody has had, will have. Every year, my intervention group was between 4 to 5 students.
Yep.
Every year. I used to say I would drag them through the year and get them where they needed to be through level text. And I was able to get those students very successful. However, they required a lot more instruction than the rest of my class did. And I felt that at the end of that year, they were able to read those books based on lots of different reading strategies that I taught them. As it turns out, some of those strategies need to be abandoned and replaced with other strategies. Strategies such as look at the picture, think about what would make sense, put a word in there, see if that works. And if that works, that's the word, right? Mm-hmm. Basically, those strategies came from setting what good readers do. Students, looking back in history, those strategies were based on examining what good readers do and then applying that to everyone, right? Because that's really what good readers do, is they kind of look over and they think about what would make sense. And boy, if I put that word in there, it doesn't make sense. So therefore it can't, right? But it doesn't help those students who are not good readers. So the breakdown happens when students, because basically you're encouraging students to guess and check, right? Mm-hmm. And that works okay for a while. But when pictures start to disappear or words are put in there that maybe students have not heard before or seen before, then things kind of fall apart. And that's really what happens in second grade.
Well, that's the challenging part, is because you mentioned, I can get them where I need them to be. But with those old strategies and with the challenge, like you just said, getting them to where they need to be for us at the end of kindergarten isn't going to mean they're going to be where they need to be when they start first grade, isn't?
They're not. They're really right.
They're going to be behind.
They're really not set up for continuing reading progress. So,
well, and that was this parent that asked me, and I know you just mentioned second grade, and we're going to talk about it. They asked about where should they be here, and some of the skills they were saying, I'm like, man, that's some stuff that I was teaching some of my readers in kindergarten. What has happened that these children, regardless of level, because there's always going to be different levels of readers, right? Like no child is ever going to read the same, but
absolutely,
there's also a range of levels for a second grader and a range of levels for first graders. So what's happening that the second grade child is still struggling with concepts and strategies that a kindergartner can grasp, and I know that's different for every kid.
Right. So if you think about reading as like a building, I don't want to use the word foundation because everybody talks about it being a reading foundation. So I'm just imagining you're reading encompassing a lot of different skills, right? And we need to make sure that they have all of those building blocks. Otherwise, they will not be successful as time goes on. And so the skills that are absolutely essential, phonemic awareness. Yes. They need to be able to put sounds together and take them apart. They need to be able to manipulate sounds. Because if you think about those multiple syllable words that they're going to be coming into into first grade, second grade, third grade on, if they can't manipulate sounds, they're not going to be able to, even if they knew all the sounds,
right.
they're not going to be able to be successful. So phonemic awareness, one of the things, and phonics, obviously phonics is something they need to know the sounds that letters make, why they make them, when that rule changes. They need to really go back to a strong phonics foundation and phonemic awareness foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So, what we want to make sure that we do is that we really invest time in students, in every student, and learning these sounds, how they go together, how to take apart a word in syllables, and how to put them back together. So, and there are some really hard and fast rules out there. I think one of the things that had happened, I don't remember when phonics went out the window, but the thought was that English doesn't make sense, right? They have all these different words and none of them really follow the rule.
Yeah, I find myself saying that a lot.
Yeah. But
English doesn't make sense.
But in reality, it does make sense if you understand it. And there are some words that are definitely pronounced now differently than they were at their origin, or they've been spelled differently through time. But at once upon a time, it did make sense. And for the majority of the words, 86% of the words out there, they make sense, right? It's the 16% of the words that don't make sense. But even with those 16% of those words, some of those letters are following a rule. I always use the example of the word said, right? Mm-hmm. You have the S that's following the rule and the D is following the rule. So, 50% of that word is following the rule. The A and the I are not saying A, they're saying eh. And so we need to teach them, hey, this is a little bit different. You're going to have to know this by heart. But the S and the D are there to help you. And then you'll have to know those irregular words. So,
right.
And I think if we return back to that, all of this that I'm saying is, I got from a training from Orton Gillingham training. There's lots of different companies that do Orton Gillingham training. Probably 5 or 6 or 7. I have no idea how many. I went through IMSE. It was an intensive 5-day training, 8 hours a day. Like you have a 10-minute break, go and have it.
He's on the phone with you. Yeah. And you were like, I get my bathroom break.
I know, legit. It was like, it was, and you were on a Zoom call, and it wasn't like you could put on Gossip Girl and watch it. No, it was active participation. And it was intense and it was expensive. However, I learned a lot. And so in order for me to kind of condense that into a, podcast episode is impossible. Yeah. I did do a, hour-long, webinar. And I did it on my blog and I did it for Deanna Jump's conference. And so I call it Not Your Mother's Sight Words, because we really do need to look differently at how we have students work on learning to decode and encode words. So right. They happen at the same time. But one thing that is really important that we do is like an intensive review. And that is kind of a drill and kill, right? Where you're just going to go through letters. They have to give you those sounds because they have to be right there. Yeah. It's not like they can't, obviously in kindergarten, they're going to be doing a little bit of searching. When they see the letter, they'll do a little searching, then they'll know. But with practice, we want that to be right there. So what sounds do these letters make? And then as you add on more sounds, so like S, you would tell them that it makes an S sound, but it also makes a Z sound, mm-hmm. right? And so they would, as they learn that sound, they would give you both sounds. They would go S and Z. So that's something that has to happen on a daily basis, maybe 30 different sound combination cards that they would get. So letters, and then as you go into digraphs, and that's why you're like 30, wait a minute, Dee Dee, digraphs, blends, that kind of thing, right? So you have those that you want to make sure that they're doing on a consistent basis, daily. And then you also want to have blending activities so that they would have a beginning sound, a medial sound, and an ending sound that they're blending on a continual basis. And they may need to start by tapping it out, tapping it, snapping it, clapping it, tapping it on their shoulder, however you want to do it. But blending those as well. So that's something that's really important that we do. And it doesn't have to be words. So it doesn't have to be cat and net. It can be nep. You're right. It could be nonsense words. And if you would have asked Dee Dee 12 months ago, I'm like, why are we teaching students nonsense words? That's ridiculous. But when we think about syllables, when we're talking about syllabication, that's a series of nonsense words, right? Like surprise or something like that, right? Where a series of words are syllables put together. So it's a very valuable skill. I just had somebody message me on Instagram, like last week, and she said, she reminded me that we had this teacher and I had a conversation, and she was talking about, she was a little apprehensive about nonsense words. And I said, in the same boat with you, but let me tell you why I've changed my thinking. And so, flash forward to when she was doing that daily drill, and there was a nonsense word pop up. The student said, and I don't remember what the word was, but she said the syllable and then said, oh, like in the word blah, blah, blah. And so she said, I had to message you to tell you that, yeah, they are making that connection. So we want to make sure students are really decoding and encoding, right? So not only do they know the sound they make, but they can hear a sound and tell you what letter they make. So also you would be giving sound. So you would do d, or I just did a D and an F if it didn't translate on the mat, on the mic. And then students would have to tell you what letter that makes, right? And they may tell you orally, they may write it down on a whiteboard or something like that. But those skills are really, really important. Some other programs out there that follow this kind of Orton-Gillingham approach to instruction is Wilson. Right. Also called Foundations. And I have been told, I have not looked at it, Saxon Phonics is also very explicit, but that's exactly what we're talking about. They really, really need to have explicit phonics. Remember 25% of the people in the world walking around have some sort of language-based learning difference. So they need to be taught, more intensely and more focused. Like if you do not have a language acquisition difference, you may need to see something 8 times, right? Mm-hmm. If you do, you may need to see it 40 times. So it's not like you have to do anything necessarily different. So what you're doing, let me say that differently. What you're doing for your intervention group should also be happening whole group.
That's what I was gonna ask you, because I feel like the questions that I've been seeing are that group time. Yes. What are we doing? How are we making this work? And you kind of answered the question already that I was about to ask was with those 25%, with your small group, your 4 or 5 students, what does that look like? And you've kind of already said it. It's just more intense practice of the skills you're already doing.
Right. You want to make sure that it's systematic and explicit. So as you're teaching in your group, you are reviewing what they already know. Right? Make sure you review what they already know, and then again, reinforce what they've just recently learned. And then they have to apply it. So it's not just, okay, today we're doing the letter B and we're only going to talk about the letter B. These are the things that you already know. Practice, that drill section should be probably 20% of your lesson. That little drill section that I talked about, the letters, the encoding, the decoding, and then you can work on some new skills also. Ideally, what you should be doing is your whole class should be receiving about 30 minutes of this type of instruction altogether. So you could do that on a Zoom call. One thing that you're going to be spelling out sight words. So they're going to be SAID said, right? They're going to be repeating those. There's lots of different ways you can do that. To make it less like, right? You could do those different different kinds of cheers. We used to do my class's favorite. It was my least favorite because it was like a little party every time we did it, was the cowboy cheer. So they all turned their chair around backwards, right? And then they did the lasso for every letter, SAID, and then they throw it for the word. But then they had the bucking bronco. They loved it.
That's awesome.
And so there's, so you don't have to be, just repeat after me, Yawn Fest USA. We don't want to do that. So, come up with some cheers. We did opera singer, monster voice, all these different things. So
I saw one recently that I absolutely loved, and it was a teacher. She put a video. I won't remember who it was, but it was a teacher playing rock, paper, scissors with their students to work on 3-letter words. So like they were working on the. So the whole class against the teacher would go, THE the, and they'd shoot on the. And whoever, like those that beat the teacher, got to stay standing, and those that didn't sat down. They were still spelling the words, but they were doing it until there was one person left doing rock, paper, scissors against. And I'm like, that, what a fun way to practice your 3-letter sight words. Like that's cool. So I guess my question then for you, because I love what you said. You've given all kinds of information here. When we shift from the old, I'm going to use the term guided reading, the old guided reading approach. To me, I think a lot of what I saw as a teacher when I followed that approach, or what was given to us from, big box curriculums or whatnot, was here's a book everybody should be reading, walk your way through that book, do this. And a lot of times I think, and even me as a naive teacher, I didn't spend as much time during groups, quote unquote, doing all the stuff you just said that needs to be done. I think that's where teachers are probably struggling right now, is how do I break up my time? Because it's so valuable, whether it's on a Zoom call or a half day in person, or my groups are even smaller in person because we can't have so many people around the table. How do we break up the time to make sure that we're hitting everything that should be hit, rather than just, and I'm not saying opening a book isn't important, but there's so many more skills that need to be developed before you even place a book in front of a child, right? So,
well, I think, in my understanding, where I've kind of settled in, is that there is a place for guided reading and there is a place for decodable text, right? Okay. So not only would you do, that drill part, then you would break into a decodable text. So these are all words that they already know, or have already been taught and should have experience with. So then they should be able to read this decodable text. It's going to be very controlled word choice, basically. So 80% of those words, it depends on who you listen to. Anywhere between 70 to 80% of those words should be decodable and known, right? So you wouldn't have a word like, all about the firehouse, maybe, unless, you front load that word firehouse, or there's some picture support. But really those decodables should be absent of picture support, other than maybe on the cover. So when I sat down to write those books, so I came up with a scope and sequence, right? So, and it corresponded with the phonics, scope and sequence that I had. And then, looking at that scope and sequence, I looked at where would I put these sight words in? Like, where would it make sense for me to do the words like can, at, those kinds of different words that are decodable. I would put that in with my phonics instruction. So that's when I teach those sight words at the same time as the phonics, because I'm teaching, they're decodable, right? Obviously they're something they can decode. Obviously we want them to be, automatic for students, right? To turn them from a high frequency words into something that they know on sight. But we start with they don't need to memorize it. They can decode it first and then bring it into their wheelhouse. Does that make sense? I think
it totally does. And I think that's an answer to a question that as teachers, we hear all the time from parents, and parents are doing more teaching now than they ever did in the past.
Right.
But I hear that question a lot. I always like, I tried to read this book for my child, but they just got frustrated. Or I asked them to help me read this sentence, but they got frustrated. Or, the example I was giving you earlier was this person had said, I read with them over a Zoom call, but they're just done because they can't do it. And
because they're at their frustration level.
They're at their frustration level, and it's probably something that's not decodable for them. And I think this is important information for anyone. Even someone who's a veteran teacher who may be stuck in that rut of, I'm going to do this because it's easier during small groups in a 2020 classroom setting.
Right.
But we can't throw what's right out the window just to make our time easier right now. And honestly,
I think
it's going to be easier when we're doing it the right way.
Right. I would say that if you are in a situation where you only have 30 minutes for an intervention group, let's first of all make sure you're teaching it to your whole class, what I just talked about.
Right.
And then now you have 30 minutes to meet with a group because now you're doing things virtually or your half day or whatever. I would say start with go back, make sure that they get lots of practice phonemic awareness activities, right? Blending and segmenting is the key to reading, right? They've got to be able to blend. So your activity, you spend a ton of time on that. Obviously syllabication is something that maybe you wouldn't be doing a whole lot in kindergarten, maybe hearing the syllables, but not necessarily taking a word and segmenting it for them. That would be more first grade, second grade, but you could teach them how, by looking at where the vowels are and what that in relationship where the consonants are, and based on where you, like, is it an open syllable, closed syllables? Teaching those things really are first, second grade, open syllable, closed syllable. But in your small group, I would make sure that I would spend time on a decodable text, reinforcing all of those letters and sounds in kindergarten and first grade. Now, in the perfect world, when we're back into the world where, remember that time when we used to all have like a normal classroom? Then you would do the decodable text and the guided reading text. Right.
I think this is important for parents too, because I know I'm going to share this episode with some parents who I know are either homeschooling or their child is in a half-day setting or they're in a virtual setting. And I mean, for sake of time, teachers don't have enough time in their day to do a Zoom call with every single student or small groups of students because there's so much on teachers' plates right now. So for parents who are asking, I think this is an episode that I want to share with them. No doubt. And parents, when you hear the terms that Didi was saying, blending, segmenting, that's really what it is. Take words that your child knows the sounds of or is working on the sounds of and practice blending those sounds together, whether it be you saying them repeating them, or you writing them repeating them, whatever step they're at. Because I know as a parent, if I wasn't a teacher, I would be putting a book in front of my child and say, let's read this together. And I'd be trying to read the sentences. Let's do it. Without knowing to do all those separate steps for sake of term skill and drill, right? Like these are the steps you have to take if you want them to become a reader.
They have to. One of the things that can happen is that students, kindergarten, first grade, they're like gung ho, like whatever, I'll do whatever you want me to do, right? But somewhere along the line into first grade, they start to get really, really, those who struggle can really, really turn off. And then you get them in second grade and now they don't want to read because they know what it's like. They know it's going to be hard. I mean, I don't want to do things that are hard.
Right.
I don't blame them and if all of their peers can do it and it's easy, and it's not easy for them, that's really hard on their self-esteem.
Well, the big part of that is celebrating the small steps. You just made me think, I did an evaluation for a student earlier this week whose family is doing some homeschooling and asked me they wanted kind of a formal evaluation of skills because they see that this child is struggling. Right. And I sat down with the child and right away I showed her some words and I was like, I just want to see what words and I knew from testing her letters and her sounds that she probably wasn't going to be able to read sight words, but I wanted the eval of that. Right. So before I even said, can you tell me what's on the screen? She just looked at me and she goes, I don't know how to read. And this little sad face. And I said, sweetheart, but listen, when you walked through that door, you found your name on my screen. You read your name. And then I said, we did some numbers and you read those numbers. So I said, don't tell me, I kind of tried to pump her up. Like, don't tell me you don't know how to read. You might not be able to read all these words I'm going to show you, but you know how to read, girl. You're on a start. And I think that's an important thing to remember. I know. We all know, everybody listening to this knows that it is so easy to get frustrated right now. It is so easy to get frustrated with our own children, with our students, with people we're working with on a daily basis because it's a frustrating time.
Yeah.
But celebrating these kiddos and the small steps they're taking is what's going to be important. And when we can help them with things that are going to be easier for them, those little celebrations are going to come naturally to them and they're going to feel like they can do it, which is then going to lead to the next step, to the next step, to the next step.
Right. I think what I would tell teachers, first of all, for parents, let me just say this. This Orton Gillingham's been around for a long time. It's been around, I don't know how long, but it's been around for a long time.
I'll just say a long time.
A really long time. All I know is it's on the cover of a book that I got. It looks like it could have been published in the 70s. That's what I'm saying. It's been around for a long time. But in my teacher preparation, I was never taught it at all. And many teachers were not taught it. Now I'm thinking it's starting to be taught. So if your teachers don't know it, I wouldn't necessarily blame them. It has to do with a shift in understanding. I think the last couple of years, it's come up a lot more. And, guess what? What we do for students who have dyslexia works for everybody else. So there's no reason just to treat it as a intervention. Mm-hmm. Somebody said now it's a prevention. So if they're taught this way from the very beginning, it really prevents a lot of delays along the way. So I'm going to teach my whole class this. Teachers out there, you're going to teach your whole class this. You're going to recognize the students who are learning slower. You're going to pull those guys aside and you're going to teach them again, and give them a second dose of it. And I would say each day they need to have, because they can't fall behind. It's much easier to prevent than it is to have an intervention with them.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we need to remember as educators that none of this is going to hurt the child, right? Like,
no.
The constant practice. Think of it like as a sports team. You practice over and over and over again, no matter how good your team is. You don't stop practicing mid-season, right?
Right.
So I think about it in terms of this, is that regardless of the level, sorry.
Right. No, that's okay.
They need that constant practice.
They need a constant. And what happens is if you take a student who was, not having any difficulty, and taught them without it, they'd still progress. But if they're taught with this type of instruction, they soar. Yeah. So it's not, I have a list of students I need to go back and say, oh my God. In fact, I did call after I finished this training. I went and I called my old school because, I spent a lot of time training the staff there.
Right.
They sent us down to experts and we spent weeks and weeks of learning. And come to find out there's some shifts that need to be made. So I called my old principal and said, I just have to tell you. And she says, thank you. But anyhow, when I sat out the scope and sequence, I'm looking at it right now because I've slept since I've done it. But it's each week we build upon skills. So week 1, we just work with the letters. Let's just say it's the first week of school. We work with the letters T, A, B, and H. And then we blend the words bat, hat, and tab, because those are some words that we can make from that. And then each week we add on more letters, and then our word list expands. So by the time we get to week 4, we are working about blending words, let's say 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. There's a combination of about 60 different words that we can do that are like real words. So words like bad, cam, lit, mad, rig, am, ham, dig, right? Because we have these 2 vowels at this point. So each week we just build upon the next week and the next week and the next week. And then we start to add some sight words in there so that we have something that we can put together to make words.
And for those people listening right now, the scope and sequence you're talking about, I'm sure you'll link everything below, but what is this? This is a unit of yours that you've put together that's out there for teachers to use?
Right. It's right. So we took, and I have this engaging readers. We looked at the phonics, and obviously you want to have this type of instruction mirror whatever you're doing for your phonics instruction, because if week 1 you're using ours, it's TABH, but your first week is MRFA or something different, then obviously this isn't going to work because they haven't been taught that. So I'm telling you what, it was like giving birth. It was so hard. It was so hard to do, but I just took our scope and sequence. Adam's like, I had no problem giving birth. I was in the waiting room. It was great.
I was in the room. I was probably sleeping, but I was in no kidding.
Oh my gosh.
I'll let you talk to Tricia about that sometime, because there's some good stories.
It was very hard because I had to think about words that would be decodable, right? And then the sight words that would incorporate. And then next week I would have to incorporate that past stuff with the new stuff. And so it was very slow process, but we were able to get it done. So we have printable books and we have it available on Seesaw, Google Slides, all of that stuff. So it's good because if you're working remotely, you can send those home. And then all of those flashcards that I talked about, I made those into PowerPoint slides so you could share your screen. I'm really card challenged. Like if somebody said, give you flashcards to move them, it would take me It'd take me forever because I'm like, oh, wait. And I dropped one, or it's upside down and backwards, or I put them in a safe place and I can't find them. So I just made PowerPoint slides so that you can just share your screen and you're good to go. What else do I want to say?
Well, I think you said it best earlier when you said, like, this was an 8-hour, 5-day training that I could talk about forever. And I know we could keep going on and on about this. I think one thing to leave with today, and I'm sure I'd love to come back and talk about this more because it is a fascinating subject when you think about everything that has to be there. But one thing to leave listeners with is not just, I mean, your guiding reader stuff that you and Deanna put together. I see compliments on that all the time. People are constantly asking, like, when are you going to release this one? When are you going to redo this one? When are you going to redo this one? But my advice too is get that stuff, teachers, parents also, but parents too, like just use the internet that's out there, use the knowledge of teachers that share stuff out there. There's if you go to YouTube, I can guarantee I'm not looking.
I was just going to say that YouTube is a great spot. They have a lot. So I would do Orton Gillingham, ORTON Gillingham, right? And there's lots of different videos are out there that are demonstrating these kinds of practice skills. And so just watch those. Let's just assume that you are like a teacher or a parent and you're like, I think my training was like $2,400. I don't have that kind of money, right? Teachers don't, right? Most teachers don't.
I don't.
Most districts don't have extra money right now for that. So I would go and glean what you can from YouTube on some of those videos. I would look and see if you can find a scope and sequence that your child or your school is using, and then start to tailor your instruction with those things in mind. You may not be able to find a decodable workbook that works. There's lots of different places online where you can make purchases. It may not be perfect for you, but it might be really better than doing nothing. But if you are a parent who has this child who is 2nd or 3rd grade and is not getting that kind of training now, I would definitely recommend you do whatever you can to get them that training. See if the school has somebody who does that. See if you can hire a private tutor if that's possible. Contact like the dyslexic. There's like a dyslexia organization almost in every area.
Right.
And you can hire a tutor. I originally was going to tutor my neighbor, but our schedules were not working out right. So I gave them a recommendation. He was a 3rd grade student who was reading, didn't know all of his sounds, was reading at a mid-kindergarten year and completely turned off on school. I mean, all of these different behaviors that, are the deflectors. We all know those students who want to deflect from the task at hand. Self-esteem in the tank. So when I realized that our schedules were not going to match, I got a name of somebody who is way better than me and gave it to them. And I talked to Mom last week and he said he's flourishing, like flourishing, and now has confidence. And so this is the time. If you're in that early childhood grade, you can make changes. If your child is in high school, maybe there's some teachers here whose own children are struggling. Mm-hmm. They can learn to read. They just need to be taught in a different way. Right. And they need to be taught in a consistently different way. I think sometimes teachers, hop from one idea to another. I mean, I'm really good at that of like, oh, that sounds good. Oh, I hop back and forth. This is something that I think needs to be a long-term approach, and with some intensive training, you can definitely learn. My parents sent my sister for training because she has dyslexia in 2nd grade. And if it weren't for them, I don't think that she ever would have learned like she should have. Yeah. And my parents, they didn't have the money. Well, my parents were very much living check to check kind of people, but a year of training and a private tutor, because the school couldn't provide it, she was able to, master reading. She's a great reader now. She reads and reads and reads. So anyhow, there's lots of teachers on Teachers Pay, teachers who have ideas. I want to say the Literacy Nest. I might be making that up.
I don't know that.
She is, let me just go ahead and I think that's right.
Well, I think while you're looking that up, what you said a few minutes ago, it was best that it's not going to be perfect maybe right now, but starting small and finding what you can online, to just do the simple steps is the way that we're going to get the engagement there and the love of it. I mean, really it's about a love of reading, a joy of reading. And if we can do it in the right way, that's just going to help continue it in the future.
Yeah. So, if you are a teacher listening to this, I think somebody that you would really want to learn from is Emily Gibbons, Gibbons. She has a blog called The Literacy Nest, as in like where a bird would sit down, right? And she really has, she's kind of an expert. So she would be somebody that I would maybe look into following and learning from. I think she has a few videos as well that might help you. There's nothing worse as a teacher than to see a student not succeed. I know that there's no worse feeling than feeling like you are doing everything that you can and yet still not able to crack this code called reading for them. And so I think that this is going to make a difference. I've had so many teachers say, email me back and said, I saw your webinar, I started your program, and my class is flourishing. But it's a lot of work. It's not like a lot of things that I make for other teachers, are sort of like they could just print and do, right? There's like, okay, print and do, because they're busy. This is learning a new way of delivering instruction. Right. So it's a big change for teachers to change their habits. And so it's effective. It's just a huge change.
What's another challenge in 2020, right? Like take it and make the most of it and then do what you can. I think that you just said is changing habits is tough. Yeah. But you can take small steps. You really can. And that's how we all learn. I know that's what would work for me, is to learn it a little bit at a time. Right. And try to do what I can. So the webinar you mentioned, is that still available, or was that a one-time thing?
It is still available. I'll put a link in the show notes so that people can find it.
Okay, perfect.
But I was going to say that, like you said, new habits are hard. So in your classroom, maybe for the first week, all you do is introduce one portion of this new way of teaching. And then the next week you add another and another. You can't come in and say, oh, guess what? We're doing everything different. You're going to lose your mind. Yep. You will lose your mind. So do 1 week, and then the next week with the definitive plan that you're going to introduce the next type of thing. I didn't even talk about Val Intensive. That's like a whole other thing.
I think we need to do another episode because I have so many more questions. I know there's a lot of people out there that do too, but this is a great place to start. I'd love to see the webinar. I know a lot of people would as well. But like you mentioned too, YouTube has a bunch. Just Google search articles on this and you're going to find some stuff to get you started.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, you guys, you know how to get in touch with me, but I'll put my email on the show notes also. So if you're like, I feel like I need more than just listening to your webinar or whatever, I can point you to different organizations. I do know a ton of schools are sending teachers for training because they are now recognizing, some states are recognizing it more than others, that this is a need. But I do think in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see a huge shift. But in the meantime, you've got those honeys in front of you that need your help. So anyhow, that's it.
Yeah, email Dee Dee, not me, because she's the expert on this and I'm not. But
I'm not. I'm not. I have to say I am not the expert. I've had some experience.
You've had experience and you have a good way of looking at it. You have a good way of helping teachers, because that's why I wanted to pose these questions to you when they were posed to me. So good talk. Good job.
Good talk.
All right. We'll see you next time, guys.
All right. Bye, guys. Hey, thanks for listening to the Classroom Collaborative Podcast.
If you are enjoying these episodes, please make sure that you subscribe wherever you are finding them.
And share and rate it so others can find it as well.
We'll see you guys on the next episode. Thanks for listening.
Bye.